Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX, and this is a special telecast, a series that we are carrying on starting today in the run-up to the US elections on 5th of November. Let's take a look at the top headlines of what all is happening in the political circuit in the run-up to the elections in America.
So let me ask you, as you sit here today, do you think the country is ready now for a woman and a woman of color to be president?
United States of America waits to vote in a historic election. Democrat Kamala Harris says America is absolutely ready for a woman president.
She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country. If she ever gets the chance to get into office, we're not going to let that happen.
Republican Donald Trump jibes at Democratic rival Harris, calls her a radical left lunatic. He claims elections will cease to exist if Kamala wins. The presidential elections and their candidates, it's a neck-and-neck fight battle as the polls project Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump by a margin of just 3 points. Democrat Kamala Harris participates in a CNN town hall today in Pennsylvania. She faces questions from people of America. Trump, meanwhile, expected to campaign in the battle state, Georgia. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer plays down allegations made by Donald Trump's team, says he can have a good relationship despite his election interference. Trump's former chief of staff John Kelly says Trump fits fascist definition, wants to be a dictator. We are 2 weeks away from the historic US elections, and the mood in the United States of America is more political than ever. The Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and his Democratic counterpart Kamala Harris have dogged themselves against each other. Now, while Harris looks to seal history by becoming the first woman president of America, Donald Trump is aiming for a second term in the White House. Now that the elections have entered their final lap, the two are at this point of time saturating the swing states with rallies and participating in televised interviews to claim an edge. There are celebrities that are also projecting themselves in support of the either side. Now, while there is Bill Gates that has endorsed Kamala Harris with a funding of $50 million, Elon Musk is vocal about his support for Donald Trump. Now, polls are extremely close and the results are becoming more unpredictable than ever as per the pollsters. Now, here's a report. Let's take a look at what happened today and the final pitches of the two candidates in the run-up to the elections.
One of the tightest US election races has entered its final stages with just 2 weeks to the historic polls. While Republican candidate Donald Trump is making his final pitches to the Latino community in Florida, Democrat Kamala Harris has taken to NBC News on the hunt for an advantage in the race. The former US president, whose anti-migrant rhetoric has grown more extreme by the day, said that the border is the biggest problem while taking a dig at US President Biden.
But I really think that the biggest problem this country has is what they've allowed to happen to us on the border. They've allowed our country to be destroyed.
At the gathering with the Latino community, Trump also threw a fiery barb at his Democratic rival Kamala Harris.
In a race with some very sick people. They're liars. They just lie. They lie about everything. And I was going to hit her really hard on the trail today, but now I don't have to because she's off. She's off. No, I can't get over it. Who the hell takes off? We have 14 days left. And she'll take a couple of more days off, too. You know why? She's lazy as hell, and she's got that reputation.
Meanwhile, the Harris campaign has begun to hammer at Trump's approach to occupy the Oval Office.
This is a person, Donald Trump, who tried to undo a free and fair election, who still denies the will of the people, who incited a violent mob to attack the United States Capitol, and 140 law enforcement officers were attacked. Some were killed.
With just over 2 weeks to Election Day, Harris and Trump are in a fierce split-screen race. Kamala Harris turned 60 on Sunday and made a campaign stop at black churches in Georgia, making a pitch to the Christian voters. On the other hand, Trump was all smiles as he scooped fries at a McDonald's franchise outside of Philadelphia. Trump's campaign stop was intended as a jab at Harris, who has talked about working at the fast food chain in her youth days.
Now I have worked this week. I've now worked for 15 minutes more than Kamala. Okay, she never worked here. I've now worked 15 minutes more than Kamala. So
both the candidates are spending their final campaign days in pivotal states.
He would surrender.
Democrat Kamala was recently joined by former Republican Liz Cheney at a campaign event in Pennsylvania, where she extended support to Kamala and said that America's democracy is at stake and Harris is a clear choice. Harris is now all set to participate in a CNN town hall where she will face voters' query in must-win Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, Trump will hold a campaign in Georgia where he claimed victory in 2016 on his way to the presidency. About 18 million Americans have already cast their votes by mail or in person, representing more than 1% of the total in 2020. Whatever may be the result, US voters will make history on November 5th by either electing the country's first woman president or the oldest ever.
All right, so that's interesting developments. There's a lot been happening. Let me bring in my first speaker on the guest, Spencer Critchley. He's the Democratic Communications Strategist and the author of Patriots of Two Nations. Thank you, Mr. Critchley, for joining me on the telecast. Your first inference of all that is happening, the kind of trading of barbs that is happening between the two candidates, the Democrat and the Republican, and how is the average American getting influenced by this diatribe that we see on a daily basis now?
You know, I would seize on that phrase, the average American. I think that's one of the key things that we have to understand in this election and the last couple of elections, is the sense of an average American is fragmenting into a nation, in many cases living within different realities. And we heard that in your news package just now. Donald Trump can present a reality to people who incline towards him that is an entirely different reality from the one that Kamala Harris inhabits and her supporters inhabit. For example, his stunt at the McDonald's, it's entirely invented, of course. It's entirely made for cameras. And he did it obviously because Kamala Harris actually did work at a McDonald's to put herself through college. And he knows that that's an attractive feature of her resume. But he also knows that in his world, images rule. In the world inhabited by Kamala Harris and her supporters, it's a much more information-based and text-based world. Now, people on my side of the fence, liberals, often say, yeah, well, that means because we're smarter. Not necessarily. My point is that people are thinking in completely different ways. And so this average American phrase, which used to have more meaning, is now unfortunately very much open to question.
Okay, all right. So then what do you make of these commentary that keeps coming in where Kamala Harris speaks about, Ukraine policy of Donald Trump, how if Donald Trump were to, try to negotiate peace, it is going to be in favor of Russia, and the Ukraine will see itself defeated, and NATO will become, crippled if Trump were to come to power. On the other hand, Trump has also showcased a very strong stance when it comes to the West Asia crisis. Do you think these two issues on foreign policy are something that are going to impact the elections, or they have no bearing whatsoever?
No, I think they do have some bearing, but this is another illustration of what I'm talking about here. Trump does the performance of strength, understanding that that's what's working for his audience. And in many ways, the way he communicates is in the same style as a medieval king would communicate. He uses language more to summon realities and to act as if he can actually control reality with his words because he's operating under the divine sanction of God. And so a lot of what he says is nonsensical and does not stand up to a moment's scrutiny. But he understands again that his audience doesn't really care about all that stuff. They want somebody who performs strength. You know, I think Harris is exactly right. The only way to end the war in Ukraine in one day is to surrender to Russia. And Trump has done that several times in the past, surrendering to the Taliban in Afghanistan, for example. But as again, I can say that all day long, and it won't make any difference at all to his most committed supporters.
Okay, all right. I also have with me Rick Mehta. He's a Republican, entrepreneur and attorney. Thanks, Rick, for joining us on the telecast. And what do you have to share, especially in remarks that have been made by Spencer? And how is Trump's campaign going? Do you think he has been able to influence a large segment of the American population who is then going to go out on 5th of November and vote for him? And what are these key aspects that could be utilized by Trump in a bid to garner that kind of popularity and that kind of influence?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me back on. I appreciate it. So in response to my esteemed colleague, you know, if we want to unpack this distorted reality that he seems to reference, just go to the average American. Look at what's going on in our country. Look at the high inflation rate. Look at the significant increase in the prices of housing and affordable housing. And then objectively look at the polls, the amount of support that President Trump has amassed over the last few weeks among significant minority blocs, Latino and Hispanic and Black voters and Asian populations. That is quite telling, especially that same support that he may not have necessarily had in 2020 is significantly increased right now in the polls. And so what I can say is that whether or not there's rhetoric, which is on both sides, each side is labeling the other as extremism. But the bottom line is that the average American wants to be able to afford normal household goods, be able to afford gas, be able to get to work, pay off their student debts, and live life more freely without as much government intervention. And the bottom line is that Donald Trump seems to be among a dialectic pathway of two choices. The main avenue that can get Americans back to a semblance of living in a better economy in America. And at the end of the day, for the average American voter, it's the economy, stupid. And that's the bottom line. And that's what I think is driving a record number of people to early vote among Republicans to the polls right now.
Okay, all right. So, Rick, you spoke about economy, and a number of these poll surveys that have come up, it has been witnessed when it comes to economy. People are more trusting of Donald Trump to stabilize the country, the inflation rate, the housing crisis, the debt crisis that at this point of time, United States of America is at the brink of facing. Immigration is something that seems to have people's vote in favor of Trump. But when it comes to the adoption wars, and there has been an effort by Donald Trump to get the support of women voters. I don't know how much of a success rate will he get? Will he have in wooing the women voters, especially in wake of the pro-adoption policy that Kamala Harris at this point of time projects?
Yeah. Well, what I will say is that the reason why Americans are more confident in Donald Trump is because he has a track record. When he was president, we had low inflation, we had interest rates that were manageable, and Americans were able to afford more and put more on their table. Under the last 4 years, we've had Kamala Harris, and she also has a track record of which she so blatantly tries to ignore and has tried to separate herself from Biden, but it's always been the Biden-Harris administration. And for all the things that she's promising America that she's going to do, the question always remains, how come she hasn't done it now? She's in a position of power. She is the vice president. She carries a significant amount of influence, and yet Americans continue to struggle. As it relates, look at the comments right now made by the Secretary of State about World War III. Are we in the brink of World War III? And his response was, well, I wouldn't say we're nearing World War III. They promised us peace in Israel. They promised to end the war. And in fact, aggression continues to expand. And I'm sure some of my other esteemed colleagues have more views about the aggression of China and Russia and what's currently going on. But it's concerning to folks in America, the conversations that North Korea and Russia continue to have, and the fact that these wars continue to expand, not detract. And how come that hasn't been put to a stop yet? And what is the plan? I think Americans are just tired of hearing what can be done when someone's in a position to do it and it hasn't been done.
Okay. Let me also get in another voice. Elizabeth Loris on the telecast with me. She is Professor Emerita of Political Science at the University of Mary Washington. Thank you, Elizabeth. And what's your inference today? Tracking the elections, the campaigning taking place. This is the last lap. And the pollsters at this point of time saying it's a tight fight, neck and neck contest. But I think most of them have given a higher rating to Kamala, maybe by 2 points or 3 points. It's a very closely contested fight. But do you think Kamala has the edge?
Kamala Harris is leading in the national polls right now, but by less than a point. The gap between Trump and Harris is less than a point. Things are trending actually more toward Trump. And there's, of course, a question about how much you can read into the polls, how accurate the polls are. For example, in 2016, when Trump was running against Hillary Clinton was up 6 points over Trump, but Trump won. And in 2020, Biden was up 8 points over Trump. Now, Biden won, but the election was quite close. So in both 2016 and 2020, the national polls underestimated Trump. And so, again, it's hard to gauge, are these polls underestimating Harris? That's probably unlikely at this point. When you look at like September to mid-October, the Harris-Trump gap was in her favor at about 2 points. And then in October, it closed up to 1 point. And now her the gap favoring her is deteriorating. But honestly, more importantly, are the battleground states. Those 7 battleground states today, right now, at this moment, Trump is leading by a bit over a point, but the trend is in his favor. That gap is getting wider, particularly in Arizona, Michigan, and Georgia. And so those things are moving in Trump's favor.
Okay, that's interesting. Elizabeth, the same question to you. Now, the 3 big agendas that have been focused by the candidates have been immigration, adoption policies of both the leaders, and you talk about the economy. Now, which candidate is faring how well on all these 3 aspects?
As Mr. Maida said, and of course we can't take credit for the origins of the slogan, it's the economy stupid, but all politics are local. People are very much focused on the economy, particularly inflation, and the high cost of housing, that people can't afford to buy houses. And so that hits people the most. Immigration gets a lot of optics, and of course that's a huge issue. And then associated with it is, heightened crime statistics. The FBI came out and said, no, crime is down. Well, they stopped collecting statistics around 2022, but lo and behold, crime is up, right? So that's a really big problem. National security is not as big as an issue as local politics, but much of the world is on fire, and that's really scaring a lot of people. So on those issues, a lot of voters see former President Trump as being able to handle those. Now, a lot of Democrats, especially women, are very interested in the abortion issue, but also they tend to favor larger government and more regulation of corporations. And so on those issues, if you favor abortion, if you favor greater regulation and bigger government, then you're going to lean more toward Harris.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Claire, what's your opinion, particularly when it comes to the issues, the local issues? I think those are the ones that are going to take center stage, and not the foreign policy, which has been raised by Team Trump, by the Republicans. How Kamala Harris is being accused of not being, as strong or as experienced a leader to carry forward the foreign policy. On the other hand, like I said, the Democrats have lambasted Trump and the Republicans for his stance on the Ukraine war. National security, the war that is escalating in West Asia and in Ukraine, in Europe, is this going to have strong enough impact for the elections to sway either way?
Thank you for having me on. Oh, sorry.
Cleo, yeah, that question is for you.
Well, I'm going to build on what Professor Laris just said, actually, which is that it isn't actually about the average American voter. It's about a very small number of people in the swing states. And there are only kind of 7 swing states, right? Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Arizona, and Wisconsin.
Right.
And in there, what you're looking at is people who are undecided, or, and this is what the Republicans have been targeting, low propensity voters. So people who haven't voted in recent elections. And just to give you an idea of the numbers, I mean, Georgia, I think, went for Trump by about 20,000 in 16, and it went for Biden in about 16,000 votes in 2020. So these are actually small numbers of voters. And the question is, where are they getting their news? Right? So are they getting it from a media ecosphere that says that under the Trump administration, there were the Abraham Accords and Putin didn't invade anybody, so on a foreign policy perspective, do you want no more wars? Or are they getting it from a media ecosphere that's saying if you bring in Trump, you're going to get all wars all the time? So there's been a real battle to get into the minds of voters, and that's where you get this very interesting phenomenon of new players, like the Elon Musk. He's paying people to sign a petition in the swing states that say they will support the First and Second Amendment. Now, that's also a way of getting their voter data in those swing states, and then to follow up with those sorts of voters who may not have voted in the last 4 elections, but who are willing to take $47 or $100 or whatever it is now to say that they'll support the First or Second Amendment. So it's a very, very unusual election, and who is going to come to the polls and when. Like, the early voting used to favor the Democrats, but now in the swing states it looks like it's favoring the Republicans.
Okay.
So it's a very unusual situation.
I also want you to reflect upon a number of these, unusual events that have taken place. And top of the lot comes the assassination bids, a couple of them on Donald Trump, and the popularity charts of Donald Trump at that significant moment of time when he was campaigning in Pennsylvania, and that attack happened, sort of surged in his favor. Was it just temporary because of the kind of news it garnered and the shock value of it, and then people then are going to go about business, and this is good? I don't know. Unfortunately, if I could say, this is good TV. Everybody's eyeballs are stuck on your television screens or wherever you are watching that incident. Just momentary, or again, and will that by any chance have impact on people voting either for Trump or against him?
So we saw that incident. Again, it's very difficult to tell who's going to actually get it to vote. But it was that incident that, for example, I think pushed Elon Musk over the edge to come out in support, and others as well. Others who'd been keeping a very low profile, including some of the pollsters, have come out and said that was the incident that really made them decide to say they were going to support Trump, and then that created a kind of a social acceptance of being able to say you were supporting Trump in communities where you couldn't before, including in Silicon Valley. So I don't know how many actual voters it will bring out, but I do know that if you can take a look at the public record, and you can see that people who had been on the fence or who had been trying to keep politically neutral thought that this was the moment where they needed to come out and say something because of the way that they saw it. And I haven't seen anything on the other side. I haven't seen anything that said that promoted Democrats to be more likely to vote. But I have seen it, and again, there are, of course, two different Republican parties, right? There's the kind of Trumplican Republican Party, and then there's the more traditional Bush or Romney kind of Republican Party, and they are very different as well. So I'm talking more about kind of the potential Trumplican voter. And in that case, the assassination attempt seemed to have motivated at least some to go public. I don't know whether it would have changed their vote, but they've at least gone public.
Okay, all right. Let's move on to the next segment. Now we're talking about, since we're discussing numbers and the polls, and that's the talk of the town, I'm going to take you through a series of these figures that have been presented by a number of these poll agencies that have come out, and these figures keep changing, 1 week after another, and we've gotten the latest figures, and taking a look at the popularity, the approval ratings for Trump and Kamala Harris. Now, this is on 21st of October, and Trump has a 46.4% approval rating, while Kamala Harris has an edge of 48.2%. So, a little less than 2 points is where Kamala Harris leads. Now, that was 538. Is the source. That's the survey that was brought out by 538 ABC News. The second survey done by Washington Post Shar School puts Trump at 47%, Harris at 50%. So that's a 3-point lead for Kamala Harris. Let's take a look at one more of these poll surveys that have been put out. This is Emerson, The Hill. This survey, again on the 21st of October, the figures stood for Trump at 49% and Harris too at the same level, 49%. So that's interesting. Let's take a look at another poll survey, Quinnipiac, where Trump stands at 48% and Harris at 46%. So one of the fewer polls that projects Trump to be ahead of Kamala Harris by 2 points. And take a look at these figures. And here you look from I'm going to just give you a perspective, because on the 21st of July, we saw that the popularity ratings for Donald Trump was at 45.3%. Kamala Harris was just a point shy at 44.2%. Now this has dramatically increased for Kamala Harris. 4th of August is 47%, while Donald Trump goes down to as less as 4 points at 44.5%. And Kamala Harris, if you take a look at this graph, has steadily improved her ratings up until 21st of October. Donald Trump, again, varying somewhere between 44% to about 46%. And this, I will have to obviously put in this information that the source, it's 538 ABC News is what, this is their survey, and this is how they project things have gone on. Let's take a look at the swing states and how the two candidates seem to be faring as per 538. And you have Kamala Harris 46.7% and Trump at 48.6%. So this is an edge in Arizona that Trump seems to have as per the poll projection. Let's take a look at the next battleground state, which includes Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina. So here you take a look at Georgia, and Trump is at 48.6%, Harris at 47%. So again, an edge that has been given to Trump by the ABC News 538 survey. Next up, Michigan, yet another battleground state, 47.3% for Trump, and Kamala Harris is just marginally ahead of him at 47.4%. So it's a very tiny, small difference between the popularity ratings if these projections are to go by. Let's take a look at the fifth swing state, the toss-up state, 47.4% for Trump in Nevada and 47.1% for Kamala Harris. Once again, the edge in favor of Donald Trump in Nevada. Let's take a look at the other swing states as well. There's North Carolina. There was Hurricane Helen that had hit, and this region was devastated, and both these leaders had campaigned aggressively over there, visiting the site. Donald Trump has a lead of 48.1%, Harris at 47.3%. And let's take a look at Pennsylvania, a very important battleground state for both these leaders. They have been campaigning over there time and again, visiting this particular state repeatedly. Trump at 47.4%. Kamala Harris has a slight edge of 47.8%. So 0.4% is the increase in the popularity chart, so the approval ratings for Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania. Let's take a look now at Wisconsin. Yes, Trump at 47.8%, Kamala Harris slightly below Trump at 47.6%. So those are numbers for you. These are the 7 battleground states. Let's now take a look at how the margin of lead happens for Harris and for Trump. So if you take a look at these 7 states, the battleground states, you take a look at 4 of these states have Trump that is in the lead, which is Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona. Meanwhile, for Harris, she has gained leads of 1% or little less than 1%, which is Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin. Now taking a look, of course, at the projections, the electoral votes projections that have also come up, and this is again the source. This is the survey that was conducted by 538, and here's the halfway mark, 270. Donald Trump, it's projected that Donald Trump is going to get to those 219 of those electoral votes. Kamala Harris right now, currently, if the projection is to be taken into consideration, 226 of those votes. And again, if you see this division, solid Democrats are 175 states. There is Democratic leaning states, which is 51. Then the solid Republican states are 188, and Republican leaning states are 31. The toss-ups are those 93 votes. Okay, all right. Now here's a look. Like I said, the division that has been shown, Harris at 226. She needs just about 44 of those seats to cross the 270 mark. Trump, 219, needs 51 of those votes to cross the 270 mark. And here's a look at this map. The bold red is, of course, the Republicans, solid Republicans. You see the blues, that's New York. And a number of these, California, Washington, they are all blue states, which means Democrat states. And of course, you have the toss-ups, which is Pennsylvania, which is North Carolina, Georgia, and you see the others. Let's take a look at the states that are reflective of how Trump, if he's going to get those 188 electoral votes, which are the states that he's going to be getting those votes out of. So these are traditional red voters. These are traditional Republican voters. So here you have a look at Nevada, Texas, Arizona, Ohio, Kentucky. So this reflects Trump's stand, Trump's gain that he at this point of time, or any Republican for that matter, and he's fighting the election. These are the states that have traditionally voted for Republicans and therefore for Trump as well. Let's take a look at these other states. These are the 2 states which are leaning towards the Republicans. So likelihood of Trump gaining these 2 states, that is Florida, is then going to be more of a possibility. Let's take a look at the solid Democratic states which favor Kamala Harris, which includes New York as well, like I said, California and Washington. And these have strong electoral votes, which is California at 54, Washington 12, New York at 28. So that make a huge chunk. And along with the others, that brings the total to 175. Taking a look at the Democratic leaning states, and this brings the total of electoral votes in favor of Kamala Harris. If these states then vote for the Democrats, turns into 51. So, and finally, I think we have the toss-up states as well, which is the swing states, the battlegrounds that are then finally going to decide who wins. So now it's important because you see Nevada, 6 of those electoral votes, Arizona at 11, Georgia 16, North Carolina 16, and then you have Pennsylvania 19, Michigan 15, and Wisconsin 10. So these are the number of states with electoral votes, as many as 93 of them, that will play the decider as to who ends up winning the election. All right, so there you have it. The figures speak for themselves. I'm going to bring back my analysts, the speakers on the discussion table, and we've taken a look at it. Spencer, how do you view these figures? Do you think these polls really have a significant say, or are they going to be able to sway the voters' preference one way or the other? Because most of the polls up until now are giving just about a 1 percentage point or a 2 percentage point lead in favor of Kamala Harris and the Democrats.
I don't think that they'll have very much influence on individual voters' decisions. There is a social effect by which people vote for the candidate they think their friends and neighbors are voting for, which can be fairly powerful. But I think most voters have already made up their minds, and these polls are so tight. The tightest polls that I believe polling experts have seen in half a century. I think they're going to wiggle a little this way and that way, and it'll be very hard to say which way they end up. And as I said, I don't think that they're going to have a great deal of influence in this case at this point in the campaign on individual voters. For me, the biggest story here is that the United States has reached a point where roughly half of all voters are willing to vote for somebody who explicitly and repeatedly promises to end democracy. As recently as just the last few days, repeatedly saying he would send the military or the National Guard after his political opponents. And when Speaker Mike Johnson, Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance, and others tried to clean up after him, as they so often do, and say, oh no, he was talking about restoring peace to the streets, supposedly, or going after illegal immigrants, supposedly, potentially disturbing topics in themselves, Trump will correct them and say no, and then name the people he's talking about: Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Democrats in general, who he refers to as evil and the enemy within. Now, Republicans might say this is just talk. He has shown his willingness to try to overthrow democracy, not just with the January 6th insurrection, but the months and months of multifaceted planning that went into that attempt to overthrow that election, and the groundwork they're laying to overthrow the coming election if he loses it. So that to me is by far the overwhelming story. And we can talk about polls. We can talk about whose economic record was better. Trump, by the way, is a lifelong incompetent at business and notorious for that. And if you actually look at the numbers, Biden's economy is better by almost every measure, except for inflation, which went up around the world, but less in the United States and came down faster in the United States than anywhere else. But none of that really matters. Even if Trump were competent, he is explicitly planning to bring democracy to an end. And for half of the country, they're either okay with that idea or they don't realize it because they live, as one of our previous speakers pointed out, and as I often point out, because they live in a different media bubble, which I would say amounts to an entirely different reality as well.
Okay, also, putting things in perspective, do you think the fight would have been as close, as tight as it is if President Biden were to still compete against Donald Trump for the upcoming elections?
No, I think that Biden was in real political trouble. And this is yet another case. I'm sorry if I sound like I'm repeating myself, but I do think this is very important. And much of our media here in the U.S. at least has been slow to catch up with this, in my opinion. Biden, by presenting that image of befuddlement during that notorious debate, presented himself as a weak leader. Now, whether that's the actual reality or not, I don't happen to think that it is. It's the image is of crucial importance, and the most important thing that any leader can present is an intuitive sense of strength and capability, in the sense that you can trust that leader to work on your behalf and on the behalf of people like you. So I think Biden, for all his merits, I think he's actually been one of the most effective presidents we've ever seen. For all his merits, I think was in very serious political trouble. And I think Kamala Harris's campaign has done a really amazing job at starting from zero and leaping ahead of where we probably would have been otherwise.
Okay, Rick, let's try to understand as well what happened, because the first presidential debate that happened, Trump was gaining ground. The Democrats were so desperate that they had to step Biden down because of his age, because he was not coherent, because he would forget names, mispronounce names, misspeak names, and there you had Kamala Harris, and then the second presidential debate happens, and there are accusations of the sort that coming in from the Republican side that Kamala Harris is wearing those Bluetooth earrings, and this was right after the popularity ratings of Kamala Harris just skyrocketed. Do you think the Republicans and Donald Trump were a little intimidated as to how there has been a change of guard? The Democrats have picked another candidate, and she seems to be gaining precedence, and she seems to be gaining popularity, and her debate and her points were so incisive and directly challenging Donald Trump. Perhaps he was not able to outperform her.
Yeah, I think, look, I think the key language you said is that the Democrats picked their candidate, right? It wasn't the will of the Democrat Party. She wasn't elected. She had no votes to become the presidential nominee. And I think the Democrats got scared. Similarly, the Democrats are completely bifurcated right now between extremism represented by Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and others, and then the more moderates that can lean across the aisle and get things done for Americans. And so what's happening is that while Kamala Harris's popularity skyrocketed when she was first picked, it had a lot to do with the fact that Biden's cognitive decline, or at least what he presented to before the Americans on television, which was very questionable and concerning to the medical community and others at large, that they finally found someone that can actually stand up and be articulate. However, what happened, and the reason why she continues to decline in the polls, is because as Americans continue to learn more and more about her, as she continued to do more presentations in front of the media, you realize that she wasn't very good at actually articulating the message, where her message became entirely about attacking Donald Trump. So in a way where there's been an obsession about Trump rather than putting forward the policies. In fact, you talked about polling, right? Let's look at the polling. Let's look at the actual polling, not between the persons and the candidates, but look at the polling on the policies. And when you look at the policies and the polling on the policies, overwhelmingly support for Donald Trump in terms of, you know, fixing the immigration crisis and the human rights crisis we have at the southern border, fixing the economy, ending the war and the aggressions overseas, bringing back safe communities. And when you talk about Kamala Harris, all you continue to hear is the same rhetoric about Donald Trump, bad man. The same man who's faced political and justice persecution, weaponizing the justice system, attacking him, going after him, forcing him to be in court outside of the campaign trail, and yet continues to be neck on neck and oftentimes higher than Kamala Harris. They've literally thrown everything to drag him through dirt, and still he continues to come out ahead. And the last piece I'll end on is that look past the polling. We have a very interesting market indicators right now. The first time where we see election betting. We see betting on the markets. $2 billion have been spent on what we call election market predictors, where people can bet on who's going to win. If you look at those numbers, it is resoundingly favorable towards Donald Trump. And I think that's where you see low propensity voters, those that may not be part of the data that surveys take, because surveys, I can tell you, weather is easier to predict than these surveys. That data is not good data, and so these polls are highly inaccurate. But look at the other indicators, and I think it's going to paint a very different picture.
Okay, interesting. And let's also get in at this point of time, Elizabeth, and you're talking about the diatribe and the back and forth that happens between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and one big attack made by her is about how Donald Trump is so old. Keeping in mind, in contrast, when Joe Biden was the pick of the Democrats to fight the elections, they are almost the same age. So by what is the reason, and does this argument hold in favor of the Democrats and Kamala Harris to then attack Donald Trump?
Well, certainly in both the campaigns, there's been a lot of personal attacks back and forth. If I were, to advise her campaign, I would probably recommend that she drop that and talk about policy instead. Because, the American voter cannot disbelieve, their eyes unless, of course, media is manufactured. But the man is out there, and he's not doing 1 or 2 events a day. He's doing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So he has energy that, most other Americans do not have. So I don't think she's going to be able to convince a lot of people of that. He's 78, but He has some type of a drive that really mystifies, the average American, how he can keep going. It is true that she took the day off yesterday and there wasn't a lot of explanation. Now, an ordinary person would be exhausted on this grueling campaign trail, and it's grueling, regardless if you're running for Congress, Senate, or president. And I, certainly would not deny someone a day of rest. But I just don't think that's going to be an effective tactic for her campaign.
Interesting. So, moving ahead, just 2 weeks left. There are battle states that are going to be targeted once again. There are going to be repeated campaigns. What do you think should the two leaders, the two candidates must focus on? Which are the communities, which are the vote banks that they need to focus on individually as Republicans and as Democrats?
It's the economy still.
Okay.
As one of your other guests indicated, yes, inflation has come down, but every American knows that prices are much higher than they were under the first Trump administration. And mortgage rates are still very high. And so when you get down to kitchen table issues, people wanting to move into a larger home or buy their first home, or young people moving out of certain states. I live in Virginia, and it has become expensive for young people. The rents are expensive. Forget buying a home, right? The rents are expensive. So they're moving to less expensive states. And so inflation is literally driving people out of their homes in search of a place that they can afford. So, Trump should focus on that. And, Kamala, as she is appealing more to female voters, there is a huge gender gap between, of course, the two campaigns. But also within the campaigns. Men overwhelmingly favor Trump more than Republican women do. And Democrat women, of course, favor Kamala. So I think she has, a way forward if she continues to pursue at least the women's vote.
Right, absolutely. I'm going to get in clear also into the conversation, and I'm going to talk about the kind of narrative that is also being built in these elections. Now, the insurrection, January 6, 2020, when that happened, 2021, and that happened, and that allowed for Donald Trump to be attacked, to be criticized as well. Whereas the Trump campaigners and the Republicans and Donald Trump himself have called that particular day as the day of love. Now, and there have been court cases, charges that have been levied against him. Does this once again impact the elections adversely against him?
Again, I think this is an information bubble issue. So you'll see it one way from one direction and one way from a different direction. But there are other narratives that are coming in that are new. I mean, the J6 stuff has been going on for a while. But for example, Kennedy joining the race with Trump has brought in issues around health that weren't in the discussion before. And it may be a motivator, for example, for Amish vote in Pennsylvania who have issues around regulations about food production to come out and vote for Trump. So, the big stuff we kind of know, it's kind of baked into the cake, but as it's evolving, you're seeing some new things coming together. Tulsi Gabbard just announced she was a Republican, for example. And it's on both sides. There's stuff that's moving, but the Trump campaign seems to have new elements that's reaching new voters in a way that is being represented in unexpected early voting and in these low propensity voters getting out. So it really is kind of an extremely unusual situation. And all of those numbers, those poll numbers that you referenced, they're largely within the margin of error.
Yeah.
So it's not, we don't really know. So all you can do is say, okay, have those votes been banked, and who's at, because of course voting has already started in most places. So who's actually getting out? What does that mean for what votes are remaining? Are the patterns the regular patterns? So I'm kind of more trying to track what's actually happened than what's projected to happen, and whether that tells you anything in comparison with previous elections. It is the information space is, I mean, as you brought up, it's incredibly important, but it's also very unusual, and it's going beyond the big stories to these kind of niche things like the Amish and you know,
Okay,
milk
all right.
pasteurization.
And also, what do you make of a number of these Republican leaders, governors, senators now joining hands and coming in aid of Kamala Harris, the latest one being Liz Cheney, and she was in a talk show and she spoke in favor of Kamala Harris and ridiculed Trump no end. How is the average American inferring all this shift in stance of Republicans, of the grand old party now favoring Kamala Harris?
Yeah, so again, this goes to this bifurcation of the Republican Party. That's a very specific sort of Republican, and they were. Democrats are calling her dad a war criminal not that long ago. So I think I think the idea is that it creates a safe space for that sort of Republican within the Democrat voting bloc. I'm not sure it appeals to that many traditional voters within the Democrats who would be voting for Democrat anyway. Because again, remember, we're only talking about a very small number of potential swing voters or low propensity voters. So maybe it'll reach some of the swing voters from the Republicans who wouldn't have felt comfortable going on to the Democrat side unless they had that kind of social bias cover kind of thing. But in terms of the numbers that we're seeing in terms of swing from one party to another, that is favoring Republican at the moment. You're seeing more Democrats going to vote for Trump than you're seeing Republicans going to vote for the Democrats, according to the poll numbers that I've seen.
Okay, all right. On that note, I'm out of time. I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast. Stay tuned on NewsX. We'll continue with our election coverage. The campaign right now in full swing, and every day 7:30 p.m. on NewsX. This is the US presidential elections 2024. We are going to dissect, we are going to analyze all that is in the run-up to the presidential elections that take place on November 5th. Thanks for watching NewsX.
अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया न्यूज NewsX का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त, मजबूत, जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो चमकता चेहरा जो दुनिया देखेगी और पसंद करेगी।
कभी नाच गाना और बेहतरीन खाना, कभी सास बहू की नोक-झोंक में स्वाद का मुस्कुराना, कभी रिश्तों में मुस्कुराहट और स्वाद भरना। असली मसालों का उपहार MDH बनाए खास हर त्योहार,
क्योंकि हर रिश्ता है स्वाद से जुड़ा।
आइए मनाए खुशियों की दीपावली MDH मसालों वाली। कभी नाच गाना और बेहतरीन खाना, कभी सास बहू की नोक-झोंक में स्वाद का मुस्कुराना, कभी रिश्तों में मुस्कुराहट और स्वाद भरना। असली मसालों का उपहार MDH बनाए खास हर त्योहार,
क्योंकि हर रिश्ता है स्वाद से जुड़ा।
आइए मनाएं खुशियों की दीपावली MDH मसालों वाली।
अगर आप बनना चाहते हैं एंकर या फिर आप में है जुनून एक तेज तर्रार न्यूज रिपोर्टर बनने का, तो आप ज्वाइन करें ITV और इंडिया NewsX का मीडिया स्कूल। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का कोर्स आपको मौका देता है देश के दिग्गज एंकर्स के साथ काम करने का। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल में आप बेहद नजदीकी से देख पाएंगे किस तरह से ITV नेटवर्क के दिग्गज पत्रकारों की टीम दिन रात खबरों पर काम करती है। इस कोर्स के दौरान आप सीखेंगे एंकरिंग की एक एक बारीकी उन एंकर्स के साथ जो देश को रखते हैं हर खबर से बाखबर। ITV नेक्स्ट मीडिया इंटरनेशनल स्कूल का ये कोर्स आपके एंकरिंग स्किल्स को करेगा इतना सशक्त, मजबूत, जिससे आप बनेंगे पत्रकारिता की दुनिया का वो चमकता चेहरा जो दुनिया देखेगी और पसंद करेगी।
कभी नाच गाना और बेहतरीन खाना, कभी सास बहू की नोक-झोंक में स्वाद का मुस्कुराना, कभी रिश्तों में मुस्कुराहट और स्वाद भरना। असली मसालों का उपहार MDH बनाए खास हर त्योहार,
क्योंकि हर रिश्ता है स्वाद से जुड़ा।
आइए मनाएं खुशियों की दीपावली MDH मसालों वाली।
Joined on dais by Shri Damu Ravi, who is Secretary Economic Relations and also Sherpa for BRICS for India. We also have Ambassador of India to Russia, Ambassador Vinay Kumar, joining us on the dais, as also Shri Abhishek Singh, who looks after multi-economic relations in the Ministry of External Affairs. I would also like to tell all of you that the language for this briefing is only English and Hindi, so please bear with us. With that, I invite the Foreign Secretary to make his remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Randir. Good afternoon, friends. I have the opportunity to brief you on the Prime Minister's main bilateral engagement today on the sidelines of the 16th BRICS Summit. My colleague, Secretary Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs, Mr. Damu Ravi, who is also our Sherpa for BRICS, will make some comments with regard to the BRICS engagements. But let me say a few words about the Prime Minister's meeting with His Excellency President Xi Jinping, the President of the People's Republic of China. We have also put out a press release which should be available very shortly on the website of the Ministry of External Affairs if it is not there already. So as you all know, earlier today, in fact just a short while ago, Prime Minister Modi met with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the 16th BRICS Summit. This was their first proper bilateral meeting at delegation level in nearly 5 years, the last one being on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit in Brasilia in 2019. So let me just flag some points made by the two leaders during their meeting. This meeting happened, as you are all aware, close on the heels of the disengagement and patrolling agreement and the resolution of issues that had arisen in the India-China border areas in 2020. Naturally, the two leaders welcomed the agreement reached between the two sides through sustained dialogue over the last several weeks in diplomatic as well as military channels. Prime Minister Modi underscored the importance of not allowing differences on boundary-related matters to disturb peace and tranquility on our borders. And in this context, the two leaders noted that the special representatives on the India-China boundary question have a critical role to play in the resolution of the boundary question and for the maintenance of peace and tranquility in the border areas. Accordingly, they instructed the special representatives to meet at an early date and to continue their efforts in this regard. You may recall that Special Representative of India, Mr. Ajit Doval, who is also the National Security Advisor, and the Special Representative of the People's Republic of China, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, also a member of the Politburo, have met on the sidelines of international events, but they have not had a round of talks in the Special Representatives format since December 2019. So following today's meeting, we hope to schedule the next round of the SR's talks at an appropriate date. The two leaders also reviewed the state of bilateral relations from a strategic and long-term perspective. They were of the view that stable bilateral relations between India and China, the two largest nations on earth, will have a positive impact on regional and global peace and prosperity. And both of them stressed that with maturity and wisdom, and by showing mutual respect for each other's sensitivities, interests, concerns, and aspirations, the two countries can have a peaceful, stable, and beneficial bilateral relationship. As we have maintained during the last 4 years, the restoration of peace and tranquility in the border areas will create space for returning us towards the path of normalization of our bilateral relations. Officials will now take the next steps to discuss enhancing strategic communication and stabilizing bilateral relations by utilizing the relevant official bilateral dialogue mechanisms, including at the level of our respective foreign ministers. The two leaders also briefly reviewed regional and international developments of mutual concern and interest. They agreed to maintain close communication in this regard. Naturally, they also had a very productive exchange on BRICS and the potential for India and China to enhance cooperation on this particular platform. And in closing, Prime Minister Modi also assured India's full support to China's SCO presidency next year in 2025. Let me stop there and request my colleague, our Sherpa for BRICS, to make a few remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends. I'll be very brief in the interest of the time. But let me just focus on the Honorable Prime Minister's visit to Kazan for the 16th BRICS Summit, which was at the invitation of President Putin.